Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and it looks like Eiji Aonuma, the overall The Legend of Zelda series producer, is at it again. He is teasing the next Zelda title, and the way this is being framed, it appears to be happening fairly soon, as in next year soon, as in 2026, Zelda's 40th anniversary year, and it does look like the stars are all aligning here for what we've been talking about for a long time, where we feel like a lot of evidence has been piling up for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake. But this conversation is going to go beyond that, because there's actually been a few other interesting things that have happened in regards to the development of a major Zelda project, if not more than one major Zelda project. And a lot of this may very well have to do with Zelda's 40th anniversary, so that's what we're diving even further into today. Are you looking for some cool Joy-Cons that are not going to drift these holidays? Then perhaps you should be checking out the Nixie Hyperion 2 wireless controllers. These Joy-Cons are pretty darn cool. As you can see, these Joy-Cons have some really cool RGB lights, there's also a removable magnetic cover, and of course they are sporting Hall effect joysticks. So you're not going to be experiencing any drift with these controllers. It is promised that these Joy-Cons will never develop any form of drift in their entire lifetimes. So we're looking at some really sturdy, stylish Joy-Cons here. And yes, these Joy-Cons not only are compatible with Nintendo Switch 1, but Nintendo Switch 2 as well. And did I mention that they're actually quite ergonomic? As you can see here, there's quite a grip you have on them, they're really comfortable to hold, and they are ideal controller options to play games like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond when you want to play in Joy-Con mode aiming around, or maybe Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. I've talked quite a bit how playing Galaxy 1 and 2 with Joy-Cons is the best way to play them, especially with Joy-Cons that have a nice, comfortable, ergonomic grip. You can check out these awesome Joy-Cons with the link in the description below. Okay, so before we get into how the Zelda series producer Aonuma is teasing the Zelda Ocarina of Time remake again, there are some other things I want to speak on here. So, firstly, a few days ago, I put out a video talking about the potential relationship with this theorized Ocarina of Time remake and what Monolith Soft could be working on. I go over a lot of evidence for both the Ocarina of Time remake and also this secret Monolith Soft project that's really not that secret because they've had recruitment pages up for years on their own website. There are LinkedIn job profile listings for this project, and we do have a series of leaks that have proven to be true that are also further supporting this idea that this project has been in the works. But the main focus for that video a few days ago was to talk about the potential relationship between Monolith Soft and this theoretical and rumored remake. And to be extra clear, I am not saying that Monolith Soft is the main developer for this potential Ocarina of Time remake, but I do think there's a great chance they are heavily involved, and there is a possibility, I'm not saying it's a fact here, but I do think there is a possibility that this project they've been hiring for so many years could be related to it. I go more into it in that video, although personally I hope they are separate projects. But what makes things more interesting here is that shortly after that video came out, Monolith Soft released this interview talking about their relationship with the development for The Legend of Zelda. It was very, very uncanny timing. And so people have taken quotes from this interview and are now thinking that Monolith Soft is making their own independent Zelda game. And when we consider the things I talked about in the video I put out a few days ago, I can see how people might get to this conclusion, but I think we need to take a closer look at the quotes from this interview here. So I'm not going to go and read this entire interview here, it will be linked in the description below, but if you follow through with it, they talk about how Monolith Soft has worked with the Zelda team over the years with these different mainline Zelda projects, Skyward Sword, then Breath of the Wild, then Tears of the Kingdom, and over time, they became more and more comfortable, they established a really good framework between both teams, and ultimately there's a lot more trust placed in Monolith Soft to develop significant aspects of the mainline open-air Zelda games. And so when we get to the very end, now that I've explained all the context, here Iwamoto says this: I would like Monolith Soft to play a central role as a strong partner in creating the Zelda series from scratch, I hope. And so people have taken this line and ran with it without reading the entire interview, without considering all the important context, or even reading this next part right here as they conclude the entire interview. I hope that the know-how we have cultivated through our work together will further enhance the overall team strength of Monolith Soft, and we will continue to create unique series titles together. And so, what's being emphasized here is the Zelda team and Monolith Soft, these two different internal Nintendo teams, continuing to work together and building their strong relationship. It is an article that talks about how Monolith Soft has continually improved and expanded. And it is an article talking about how Monolith Soft is going to take on a larger and larger Zelda role. But it is not necessarily indicating that Monolith Soft is going to be the sole team in making a Zelda project. However, when we consider this, and when we talked about recently how there is this legacy project, and when they were recruiting for it, they had multiple pieces of art that seemed to be very much having to do with The Legend of Zelda, like literal Zelda symbolism. And no, this recruitment page was a completely separate recruitment page than from their recruitment page hiring to do Zelda support work. It definitely gets you wondering and thinking. Maybe they are the studio that's put a lot of work into Ocarina of Time Remake. That's a possibility. It's also a possibility they're working on something completely different. Maybe it's not Zelda at all, but there are some similarities because it is of a fantasy medieval world. And so those bits of art just had some Zelda symbolism because, well, it fit. And it could even be a scenario where maybe it is in the same universe as The Legend of Zelda, but it's still its own separate thing. And perhaps it's a project that we could see come out for Zelda's 40th anniversary if we're not ready to see the next big new Zelda game or even an ambitious remake. Or perhaps it's so different we could see both. These are all possibilities. And so it's a very interesting interview that came out at an opportune time, at least if you've been following what I've been talking about as of late. But moving on from this, there's something else that's been going on that I think is interesting and could be a sign for what's to come next year, but I wouldn't put nearly as much stock into it as what we've heard from Aonuma, which we will be getting to. But what I'm getting at here is what's been said by Nintendo. So we talked about this before the Game Awards, how he had just posted, mysteriously, Zelda Remake. Nintendo has leaked things in the past. That's not what he typically does. He focuses on sharing out different deals to save money on games and such. But when he said that, it definitely got us all thinking. And when we talked about this, if you remember, yes, we discussed it as a possibility for the Game Awards, but also the main conclusion was that it would be unlikely for actually the Game Awards because that's not how Nintendo's been operating as of late, making brand new announcements at the Game Awards. They might give us an update on something that's already been announced, telling us more about what's to come for an already announced project, but official announcements of new projects that we did not know about, officially speaking, have not happened at the Game Awards from Nintendo, excluding Bayonetta announcements, which are really being made by Platinum Games. So it always seemed unlikely that it was there, and this is more so maybe Nintendo just suggesting that he's heard something about a Zelda remake for next year, Zelda's 40th anniversary. And so what makes this further interesting is that not too much later, Nintendo did this other tweet where he says, "Hey, listen." "Hey, listen" is from Navi from Ocarina of Time. So it's clearly, objectively speaking, an Ocarina of Time reference. Considering this came out shortly after he made that tweet about the Zelda remake, it is definitely a curious situation. However, I did not speak on this when it happened because it's also about providing support for people who are going through hard times. So I felt that was the main purpose of the tweet, and the "hey listen" may have just been Nintendo expressing his love for Zelda, getting people's attention, and sharing out these numbers to help out people who are in need. And so that's what I think the main purpose of this is. I do still think it's worth mentioning since I have mentioned it, but I've seen people running away with this saying that this is like Ocarina of Time Remake confirmed from this one tweet here, and I don't think that's the case. I think you have to be paying attention to everything that we've been sort of talking about over the years that has been continually stacking upon each other. We have a mountain of evidence to suggest that this is in the works, but one single tweet or one single article or one single theory that makes sense by themselves, it's not convincing. It's simply when you consider everything together where it becomes convincing. As I've talked about in prior videos. And I strongly encourage you, if you haven't seen those videos, seen the entire list of evidence, that you check out those prior videos. I'll have one in the iCard, because without looking at everything, without having the entire context of the situation, you may not fully understand why what I'm about to talk about is such a big deal. But before getting to that, if you've gone this far into the video, let me simply point out that I do have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers. So if you find yourself enjoying this video or some of my other videos, I would very much appreciate your support. Subscribing if you haven't already, liking, commenting, it all makes a big difference. And now we come to this new interview that just came out where Eiji Aonuma participated and has very arguably teased the theorized Ocarina of Time remake for a third time. And so this is what was said. The Legend of Zelda Chronicles of the Forbidden Kingdom, keep in mind that this is a translation. This is from 4gamer.net, this is translated into English, which is why it looks a little bit different, but anyways, is the first Zelda title for the Nintendo Switch 2. To be honest, we wanted to be the first to do so. Laughs. This is important. However, the inspiration we received from this collaboration with Koei Tecmo may be reflected in the Zelda we create. Please imagine this while playing Chronicle of the Sealed Zone and look forward to our Zelda. So there are some weird translation things with the name of Age of Imprisonment. As you see, it's been translated differently twice. Not that important here. Main point is that this is an interview talking about Age of Imprisonment, but Aonuma does say something here that's very key for this Zelda remake we keep theorizing on, where he says, to be honest, we wanted to be the first to do so. Laughs. So when he says we wanted to be the first to do so, he's talking about the Zelda team. And there's an implication there that they may have been close, but with Age of Imprisonment coming out within the first 6 months of Switch 2, that did not happen. But we're now entering Zelda's 40th anniversary, where it's believed there will be Zelda releases. And you might think this isn't much, but this is where I go back to, if you have not been paying attention or you have not heard or seen the things we've been talking about in lead up to this moment, without the context, it may not seem like that big of a deal, but it absolutely is. So I made a video a while back going over all the different instances where Eiji Aonuma has teased future Zelda projects. And he's done this many times. He's teased Skyward Sword. He was at a Zelda concert where he teased it, and Nintendo executives shortly afterwards had to say that Skyward Sword was not coming to Switch, but what happened? Skyward Sword came to Switch. He's teased Majora's Mask 3D. He's teased even Echoes of Wisdom when talking about Zelda taking on a lead role, and it was announced just a few months later from this interview. We've even seen him himself confirm that he does tease Zelda projects when he confirmed that he had teased Link's Awakening Remake years prior. And so Aonuma is on the record himself telling us that he does tease future Zelda projects, and we've seen him tease future Zelda projects several times. This is nothing new. But when you go back to all these different interviews, what you'll notice with these different interviews is when he does this tease, he does something that kind of is out of character compared to everything else in the interview. Oftentimes, there is a laugh that's depicted in parentheticals by the interview, or a no comment in English, when oftentimes he'd be speaking in Japanese. And so bringing up the times that Aonuma has very arguably teased Ocarina of Time Remake, both times he went out of character in a similar way, or rather in character for when he teases a future Zelda project. Like with the Game Informer interview, he was point blank asked if there would be an Ocarina of Time remake, and he laughs and says no comment, and he did it in English, by the way, even though he was speaking in Japanese for most of the interview. And in regards to this no comment, it should be kept in mind that during the same frame of time, there was another interview Aonuma took part in where he was asked about there being a Zelda Dungeon Maker, and he shot down the idea. He shoots down ideas when they're not going to happen, but when they are, he says no comment and laughs. Or there is this other interview with Nintendo Dream Magazine where he talked about how he didn't think many fans would know who Raru is, the character from Ocarina of Time. And so now we have a situation where Aonuma has done something very similar, where he's being very forthcoming. He literally says, to be honest, that they wanted to put out a Zelda project first, Koei Tecmo beat them to the punch. It's noted that he laughed, which is rare to do in these interviews, something very similar to how he's teased many other prior Zelda projects. And we're entering this 40th anniversary, and we have all these other things to consider with this remake project. We have the multiple Ocarina of Time Zelda Lego sets, the Deku Tree one that came out a while back, and now the new one that's just about Ocarina of Time, having to do with Link vs. Ganondorf at the very end. We have the many references to the Hero of Time era in Echoes of Wisdom, Tears of the Kingdom, even Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and by the way, it's not just Aonuma himself that teases future Zelda projects, but we've even seen it in games, like in A Link Between Worlds, where they had a Majora's Mask that was teasing Majora's Mask 3D to come out later. And we do need an ambitious Zelda project to come out really soon. And so going back to this interview, Aonuma is not specifically stating it's going to be a remake, but Tears of the Kingdom came out in 2023. It does not make sense to think that the mainline Zelda team has an open-air Zelda ready, but he's talking about wanting to get something out soon and be the first, or wanting to, even though they actually weren't. Which to me suggests that the only way this is reasonably possible is if they have been indeed working on this remake that we feel has been teased several times. There's been a lot of public evidence, and, by the way, has been rumored from a few different places as well. Even if you don't want to believe it's an Ocarina of Time remake, clearly Aonuma is suggesting that they have a Zelda project, the Zelda team has a Zelda project that they wanted to get out early on for Switch 2, and Koei Tecmo beat them to the punch with Age of Imprisonment. So there's something else. I suppose you can maybe look at this from an extremely pessimistic perspective and just saying that he wanted to in a fantasy world, but it was nowhere close to possible and they're many, many years away, which seems extremely unlikely to me. But something else that should be mentioned here is that Aonuma also talks about how we should take a closer look at Age of Imprisonment because it can give us some signs as to what to expect for the future of The Legend of Zelda. Some of this, I wonder, is if we should be taking a closer look at some of the story and the characters, as I was theorizing beforehand, before the game came out, because we actually had several hints for Tears of the Kingdom in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, the Zelda Warriors game about Breath of the Wild, so I've thought, will they also have teases for the next Zelda project in this Warriors game about Tears of the Kingdom? And so there are things we have seen in Age of Imprisonment that are arguably maybe teasing from that perspective. We have the attendants to Ganondorf, Kotake and Koeme, who weren't named in the game, so I do wonder if they have some DLC plans in the future. We'll see. And then we also have Kalamo, who we thought might be the Deku Tree, because there is no Deku Tree in Age of Imprisonment, but that's not quite exactly what happens. I won't say exactly here in case you don't want to be spoiled, but it's not exactly that. However, it does get us wondering about what is going on with the Deku Tree, and perhaps that is what Aonuma is alluding to. Or he could be alluding to there being a great war, and what's interesting about that possibility is that we go back to the Monolith project, where they have some of this art that's very Zelda-like, one of which shows what appears to be almost like a warrior Princess Zelda in a war. So could it be with the next Zelda they're thinking about having more of a widespread, large-scale battle going on, or war going on? When we think about even in Tears of the Kingdom, they had some large skirmishes happening. Like, you would enter enemy encampments with large groups of Hylian soldiers to fight all these different bokoblins and such. So could they be building on this concept for the next Zelda game? It's an idea. I'm not necessarily against it, but I also wouldn't want it to function like warriors. If there's any team that I think deserves the benefit of the doubt, though, it is the Zelda team, so I'm not too worried about it. Now, another possibility that Aonuma might be referencing here is just this idea of more involved combat, and that is something that I think the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom games needed. They needed Link to be able to do a little bit more with his sword options and such, so hopefully they build upon that for the next Zelda game. I feel like that's where there's some obvious room for improvement here. But anyways, everyone, those are my thoughts on what's been going on lately with all this Zelda stuff and 40th anniversary teases and perhaps the Ocarina of Time remake. I have been convinced for a long time that this project is happening, and with this latest interview, I'm just a bit more convinced. I've gone from 110% to like a 115%. I guess if there's anything new that I take away in terms of there being an Ocarina of Time remake project is that I now believe with more confidence it could be happening in the year of 2026. Beforehand, I've been thinking it's either 2026 if we're lucky, or late 2027. Now I have more hope. But let me know what you all think in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.